We begin the current Daf, Mesech, Megillah Daf. We begin on the bottom of Chav Gimel Beis, 2 lines up in the bottom of the Amid on the first wide line, where we continue to look at the next Mishnah, which continues in the theme of the previous Mishnah, which was discussing the related topic of our parak, of our Masechta, of the Kriyas Megillah, which we got into the discussion regarding Kriyas Atayr. We continue on that theme. So I need to to today's Daf. So we're discussing today's Daf our Koyr B'Torah. We have various halachas of the one that's related to the Torah, including leifchis mishlesh psukim, that he shouldn't read from the Torah less than 3 psukim, and meturgaman, how many psukim he should read before pausing for the translator. Medalgin, when can he skip from one place to another? Mafter v'navi, various honors given to the person who reads mafter. Katan, pecheach, and summa, which serves as a minor, or someone with bare legs, or a blind person can perform for the tzibur. Kohen shesh b'yadav mumah, a kohen cannot go up for berachas kama if he has blemishes on his hands. And derech aminus v'achitzainim, various practices for davening and tefillin, which are the ways of heretics and those who do not follow the words of Chazal. So we begin the current Daf. Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis on the second line from the bottom. The Mishnah says, Hakoyr B'Torah, someone who reads from the Torah, leifchis mishlesh psukim, he shouldn't do less than 3 psukim, and aliyah has to have at least 3 psukim. Moreover, v'leikra l'meturgaman, he should not read for the translator, yesem b'pasuk echad, more than one pasuk, because we don't want the translator to make a mistake who he's translating orally. So you do one pasuk at a time. If you do too many, he might make a mistake, and then people are not going to get the right interpretation of the words of the Torah. Now, it's getting time of Chavdal Minal, Navi, but if you're reading from the Navi, like by Daf Torah, then Shleisha, then if you want to, you could do 3 psukim at a time for the translator, because we don't care if he makes a mistake, because we don't really learn out any halacha from Navi. It's stories, and it's Musar, and it's a tshuva, but we're not so concerned over there. Which Taisa says now we don't even translate at all, meaning Taisa says they did 1 pasuk at a time because they were concerned, and therefore they started, and the first 3 were actually, they did it in one shot to let them know that's the halacha, but we actually don't even do it at all. Mishnah says, Hayishlashta. Now, however, even though by Navi we said you could do 3 psukim at a time, if the 3 psukim in Navi were sholish parashas, there were 3 parashas, so the Gemara is going to explain, what do you find 3 psukim in a row to be 3 different parashas? But if you have such a thing, then you have to read each pasuk of the Navi individually for the translator, and not all 3 at one shot. Moreover, the Mishnah contrasts this of Navi and Torah, medalgin ben Navi. You could skip around in Navi from parasha to parasha, but you cannot skip around in the Torah when you're reading, because if someone hears you skipping from place to place, he's not so focused to hear what you're saying. And by Kriyas Atayr, again, we're very concerned. We want to make sure that you really understand. In Navi, we're not so concerned, so you could skip in Navi. Now, Kamahu Metalik, this that we said you could skip when you're reading from the Navi, how much can you skip? Says the Mishnah, until the Meturgaman didn't stop translating. Meaning, you're not going to skip from where you're reading, only if you could roll the Sefer, and that you'll read from where you skip to before the Meturgaman finished translating his targum of what you had first read, because it's not what's called kavod tzibur. It's not respectable for the public that they should just be standing there silent. As long as he's continuing to translate, then you could still roll and you could skip to another place in Navi. Now the Gemara says the opening halacha of our Mishnah was that when you're getting an aliyah, it can't be less than 3 psukim. Says the Gemara, Hani gimel psukim keneged mi. We had asked similar questions in the past. What's it 3 aliyahs? Now asking why does every aliyah have to have 3 psukim? So Manavasi says, can I get turn the Vim correlating to the 3 svarim of what we call Tanakh, turn the Vim Ksuvim? That's why everyone has to have 3 aliyahs. That's why everyone has to have in his aliyah 3 psukim. Now the Mishnah said, you shouldn't read for the translator. When they used to have the Kriyas Atayr, they would have a translator translating. You shouldn't do more than Yosem pasuk echad. Don't do more than 1 pasuk at a time. Now, the Navi we said you could do Gimel psukim, but the the 3 psukim of Navi were 3 parashas, then could then you should read for the translator 1 pasuk at a time. Says the Gemara, where do you find this, that you could have 3 psukim that are 3 parashas? Going, for example, in Yeshaya, you have Kichoy Omar Hashem, because so says Hashem, Chinam Imkartim, for nothing did I sell them. And the next pasuk is another parasha, Kichoy Omar Hashem, because so says Hashem, God, Mitzrayim, Yoredim B'Rishayna, it went down to Mitzrayim first. V'ata, and the next pasuk, V'ata Mali Poinam Hashem, says, what do I have over here? That those are 3 psukim, one after another, and they're all considered as a different parasha. Those would have to be translated individually, not as you can normally do Navi 3 in a row. Moreover, we said in the Mishnah, Medalgim Navi, you could skip when you're reading from the Navi, but when you're reading from the Torah, you can't just skip Sukkim to continue reading. So the Gemara asks a contradiction. But I mean, there seems to be a contradiction from Mishnah Mesechtas Yoma. The Mishnah says over there, the Kohen Gadol, he reads on Yom Kippurim, he reads from the Parsha of Achrei Mos, which that talks about the Parsha of Yom Kippurim. He also reads Va'achrei Ba'ach Ba'asar, which also talks about the halachas of Yom Kippurim, which are on the 10th of Tishrei. Now the problem is, V'kol Medalik. But then he's skipping because the Parsha of Ach Ba'asar L'Chodesh Hashvi is in Parshas Emor, when it talks about the Yom Tovim, and this is in Achrei Mos. Achrei Mos Kedoshim Emor. So you're skipping. I thought you said when you're reading the Torah you can't skip. My Abai says it's not difficult because when did we say you can't skip? Is if the translator is going to be pausing, waiting for you to roll the Sefer Torah. That's problematic. But here the parshas are very close, Achrei Mos and Emor, not so far, and you roll quickly. The translator didn't stop translating, so therefore the Kohen Gadol could read from and skip from Achrei Mos to Emor. But the Gemara says that's a difficult answer to give because Va'allah Ktani, which Rashi has taken out the word Allah, is not Allah, but on that we learned in our Mishnah that Medalgim Navi ve'Medalgim B'Torah. Our Mishnah just said we had mentioned that you could skip when you're reading from the Navi, but you cannot skip when you're reading from the Torah. Now, and then the Mishnah qualified and said, and how much can you skip when you're reading from the Navi? Because that's the one that you said you could skip. So that's what we said that Kadesh al as long as the translator didn't stop translating it. Mechlal, the inference is the B'Teira, Klal Klal. Don't tell me that by Torah you could skip if the translator didn't stop. That's how goofy what we were contrasting with Navi. We said only Navi you could skip, and Navi's only if Shlei is a Turgaman. So Torah is obviously even if he didn't stop translating. So Elam Abai, rather Abai gives a different answer. He says, Lekash is not difficult. Khan, over here, meaning in the Mishnah Mesechtas Yoma, is Be'inyan Echad. Where both those parashas of Achrei Mos and Emor, they're both talking about the same thing, they're both talking about Yom Kippurim. So a person doesn't get confused. So therefore, if the translator didn't stop translating it, you could skip from Achrei Mos to Emor, because they're talking about the same thing. Khan, in our Mishnah that we said that you can't skip at all, is B'shtei Inyanos. That's two different topics. Let's say go from the Parsha of Negoim to the Parsha of Zavin. That's two different things. And again, by Torah, we want to make sure the person's understanding what the Kriyas HaTorah is for, because they're learning out all Torah from the Kriyas HaTorah. And therefore, that's why our Mishnah said you can't skip it all. As the Gemara says, Vatanya, which, although generally Vatanya means a question, but here it means what's called Benichusa. And yes, this is how we learned in the Brisa. The Brisa says, Medalgim b'Torah be'inyan echad. You could skip when you're reading from the Torah if it's on one topic. Uven Navi, b'shnei inyanim. When you're reading from Navi, even if it's two different topics. But and both are required that, however, it's not kaparat tzibur for them to just be sitting there. As long as the translator will still be translating, then you could be rolling to the next place. Tanya, another brayso, the imedalgim Navi with Navi. Although we said by Navi you could skip, can't skip from one sefer Navi to another sefer Navi, because that's even confusing for someone hearing from the Navi to skip to another sefer. But the Navi shel shnei maser is one of the Sifrei Tanakh is Trei Aser, which although it's 12 different prophecies and in a sense different svarim, but it's really one sefer of Trei Aser, so the medalg you could skip. As long as you don't skip from the end of the sefer to the beginning, meaning you don't go backwards. If you're going to skip, go forward but not backward. That would really be too discombobulating for somebody, and that even by Navi would be problematic. So now look at the next Mishnah. Continue on this theme regarding the mafter and the Navi, so that brings us into a related discussion. It says the Mishnah, HaMafter ben Navi, someone that generally gets the haftarah from the Navi. So Chacham instituted that who poiris al Shema, that he's going to be the one that will say Birchas Kriya Shema, and whoever lives in Teva, he's going to go ahead and daven for the Amid to be Meitzi the Tzibur by davening when you have Kedusha. And V'unois Kappa, which it means like specifically he's going to be the one that's Kavua, like we find in Taisis, such a thing that there is someone that you could mitamol doing this Kappa, and then you could be the one that's the designated one to do Birchas Kainim. We give him, this person that does the mafter, we reward him, as we'll see in the Gemara, that to be the one who makes Birchas Kriya Shema, to dam v'amid, to do Nesis Kapayim. Now, the Maya Katan, which we know a child could get mafter, could get any aliyah really according to Talmudic law. If he was a minor, then Avay Rabbi Oivin Al Yodai. Then his father or his teacher, they get the Tadav v'amid because of him. Moreover, the Mishnah explains that Katan Koyda B'Torah M'Targum. A child could be the Bal Koyda, could read from the Torah, he could also translate it. Aval in the Peiris al Shema, but he cannot make Birchas Kriya Shema, meaning to be the Chazan. Vein Oivel Lefnei HaTeva, can't go daven for the Amid, because he's coming to fulfill the public's obligations by the Birchas Kriya Shema, Baruch Hu, and for davening for the Amid, for Kedusha, and since he's not Machliyev, he's a minor, so he cannot fulfill others' obligations, which Taisa actually discusses why you tell me a child cannot daven for the Amid, even an adult can't daven for the Amid. As the Gemara says in Chulin, that it has to be Nismal Zikana, he has to have a full beard to daven for the Amid. So Taisa says, no, there's a difference. Taisa says with like a tiny tzibur, we know like Yom Kippurim, certain, or Shatz Kavua, that's supposed to be. But Akra Ba'ama, an adult could, and that's what's saying that a minor can never do that. But so that's what it's saying, that he can't daven for the Amid or do Priestess Shema because he's coming to fulfill others' obligations, and a minor can't do that. And also the Nesis Kappa. If he's a kohen, he cannot do Nesis Kappaim because it's not honor for the tzibur that they should be subservient to the bracha of a minor, which Tais here also asks. He says, well, it sounds like if he's an adult, he could, but there's a Gemara also talks about Nesis Kappaim. He also has to have Nismal as a kohen. So Tais says that although we do find places that a child could do Nesis Kappaim, that's only with adults, that he's just learning and he's getting chinuch. Just that we say a minor over here would be invalid, would be if there's no adults with him. We find elsewhere that it has to have a full beard. That's again, if he's doing it b'kfiyas. But Akra B'Alma, an adult could do it just to show that he's a kayan. But you're right, not necessarily is it even enough to just be an adult. But a minor for sure cannot do Nesis Kapayim on his own. The Mishnah continues Pecheach, which Rashi explains that from Masech to Seifrim to mean that if his knees are visible, like wearing shorts, is like barefoot. Taisa says no, that it actually is someone who has torn clothing. Maybe that as a may, such a person could be Peres Shema. He could say Birchas Kriya Shema for the tzibur because he is Mechuyev in the bracha, and in the Targum he could translate the Torah. He cannot read from the Torah. It can't be the Bal Torah because it's covered Torah. It's not honorable for such a person to be the Bal Torah. And he cannot go daven for the Amid, and neither could do Nesis Kappaim again because it's disgraceful for the tzibur for a person to be in such a state of undress and do these things for the tzibur. Suma, a blind person, Paides Shema, he could say Birchas Kriya Shema, U'Metargum he could translate the Torah. Yehuda says no. Whoever didn't see the luminaries in his days because he's blind, can't see the sun. So in the prayer says so he can't say Birchas Kriya Shema because we say Yitzam Ha'idus. So you think Hashem that He creates the luminaries, or you never saw it anyway. So what are you going and thanking Hashem for? So he can't be the one to say Birchas Kriya Shema. Now Tosfos finds this difficult because this is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says in Baba Kama that a summa is part of all mitzvahs. So if he's a summa, even if he would see the luminaries and then become blind, so like he could say Yitzam Ha'idus, he would still be part of because he's a summa. So he says, you're right, we're not talking about real summa, we're talking about that he's in the dark room. So someone who's in a dark room, so he can't see, so he can't say Yitzam Ha'idus. That's one pshat he says. Or he says another pshat that no, we are talking about a blind person. But there that Rabbi Yehuda says a blind person is potter is only in that Torah. But rabbinically, he actually is chayiv in all the mitzvahs. Even if he was born blind, he's still chayiv in the Rabbanan. And Tosfos says very important words, Shlehei Kenachri. V'lehei noig b'y das Yehudi klal. If you tell me a sum is part of kol mitzvahs, so this blind person is a shegitz. He's not doing any mitzvahs at all. Says you can't compare it to women. Because women, although they're exempt from all mitzvahs, even those that are rabbinic, because Tosfos proves, they says Ner Chanukah, Adal Kaises, Megillah, all the big Jewish mitzvahs, those are only rabbinic, and the woman would be exempt. They're only chayv because Afein Hayi Beis Hanes. So he says, but you can't compare. Women, they're only exempt from mitzvah she's magudam. They have all mitzvahs loises. They all not point. Not if it's not magudam, they have.
Don't be mitzvahs loises. It cannot be over isuri. We're talking about if it's mechuyev mitzvahs aseh.
Is that true? You're trying to remember Summa?
Can he what? Can he eat chazer? He's put him in a mitzvah. He doesn't have to show kulila. He's put it.
It's only mitzvah say. Only mitzvah say.
I would assume that that's a
good question. It's a good question. Why would you say that?
Because
why is the Summa pater?
Mitzvahs is put from doing mitzvahs. A oinen. It's put him in a mitzvah.
A cotton.
A oinen.
What's about a cotton?
He maybe doesn't know, but he's
cotton. The cotton is also part of the cotton.
He's a cotton. He doesn't know. And let's say a oinen. Oinen is put him in a mitzvahs. Why he cannot do it on a milah?
So what's the tour of the oinen? Is it the same tour?
Oh, he doesn't have.
No, but what's the tour? What we
because he's stolen now.
Right, but why would that let him be oil? It's not the reason why Summa is pater. Why is Summa pater?
He cannot be oil on loises.
But why is he pater from mitzvahs?
Because mitzvahs tzrichas kavuna efsher. He doesn't have the kavuna there.
I don't know. So quite a good show.
Yeah, so I would assume the loises is not.
So why would Taisa say that it's considered like
This is what surprises.
Yeah. But he says no. He says that that's a difference. He says women that's only mitzvah shema gudam, but everything else they're chayivin, and so therefore a summa, although midirabanan, you would have thought, unlike we said a cotton that has two dirabanans can have mighty others, a summa he says is different because he's still like he's a bardas. More than a child, so you would think he could be mitzvah according to Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda has to say it's because he never saw ma'ayris miyama. That's why he cannot be mitzvah others with birchas kriyishma, because he can't tell you it's ma'ayris because he was always blind. But the Gemara says, my timer. What's the reason that the mafter, the opening halacha of our Mishnah was that whoever gets mafter, so he's the one that davens for the amid. So what's the reason why he davens for the amid? So Papa Amid says mishum kavod, because it's a covered we give him to daven for the amid, because since he made himself available for something that's not covedik, which that's a whole interesting thing about mafter, and that's why mafter is really, that aliyah is not really the same. It's not the equivalent of all other. Therefore, a minor really could do that, and it's really cases on the previous daf discussed that. That's why we really say over the same. Mafta doesn't say any new psukim, it's the same one, so it's not such a kavod aliyah. So that we give him this kavod of davening for the amid. That's one pshat. He says Mishum Dasal Amtsuy. He says no, it's going to come to machlekes because I did mafta and you're going to go daven for the amid. Well, what does that mean? I mean, it's at least give me mafta, but it's not because of kavod, it's because it's going to come to a fight. So what's the difference between them? The difference between them is the avid. That if the one who's going to daven for the amid is doing it b'chinam, is doing it for free, he's not getting paid for it. So therefore, there's no problem about getting into a fight, because it sounds like that the way Rashi makes it sound like that the fight would be about getting paid. So I'm doing this mafta thing, and you're getting paid to daven for the amid. So there's no fights because I'm not getting paid anyway. But there would still be the idea of giving him covered, to respect him for, you did mafter, we'll give you the opportunity to have a amid. That would be the difference between those two interpretations. But the Gemara asks now from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that if he was a child, however, who got mafter, so then the father or the teacher, they get to daven the amid in place of the child. Now, if you say the reason that you were telling me why the mafter gets to daven the amid is because of fighting, cotton bar letzuyehu. You think a child's going to pick a fight because he's not getting the reward of davening for the amid? But since when does a child actually get into a fight about these types of things? So the Gemara says, wait a second, what type of a time is that? So you want to say the reason is not because of fight, because of honor, and we have to respect him, and because he got mafter, we have to give him the cover of davening for the amid. But cotton bar kabbalah, you think a child is someone who cares about respect, about status? That's usually something when you become older, you're at least a teenager or something, that you then suddenly start caring about your status. But younger not, so why would we have to give the father or the teacher to take the place of the minor as if he actually cares about it? Rather, what are you going to say? And therefore it's not difficult on me either, says this Mandamar. it could cover up if the covered rabbi. The reason is because, of course, it's not because of the cover of the child. The child would daven maftir. The father's my kid. He daven with the Amid. I deserve to daven with the Rebbe says this man Talmud. This is so. Therefore, it makes sense to you why we would give it to the father, not because the kid wants it and he just can't do it because he can't be mighty. Others therefore give it to the father. No, the father is a man kid, so he can tell with the base. So Hanami, he can Nitzuya up and Nitzuya Rabbi. Here it's also the same thing. It's going to come to the father or the Rebbe is going to fight with the one who's davening for the Amid because he's getting that reward instead of his student. And you don't have to go as far as Little League. You know, all the fights that they start fist fights. The kids don't care so much. The coaches or the fathers, they come onto the field and they start punching faces because they care. So therefore, it's possible to cause a fight with the father, with the Rebbe, and therefore that's why we say that they get it. But it's not a contradiction to any one of the two opinions if it's because of cover or because of Nitzuya. Now we said in the Mishnah that Pecheach, that someone who's barefoot is Pailis al Shema B'chul. He could say because Kriya Shema, but he cannot read from the Torah. Now Vayimnei Ula Barav Me'abai says Katan Pecheach Ma'o Shika B'Torah. What's the halacha? Let's say a child is wearing shorts. And what's the halacha? Could he read from the Torah? Now, as Rashi explains, the adult we're saying in the Mishnah, if he's barefoot, he cannot because lo yiro v'cha'ervas davar. It's interesting that's the qualification. It's like it's a gila erva that his feet are bare, but a child's not. He doesn't have that hazara. He's a child. Or maybe we don't differentiate in the Mishnah between a katan and a gadol. So Malay said to him, why are you asking me about if a kid's wearing shorts if he could read from the Torah? But Tibaylach Arm, why don't you ask if he's totally undressed? Why are you not asking me regarding Aram? Obviously it's not dignified for the tzibah that it should become like that. Also, it's like basically there's a way of argumentation that you go to the extreme to illustrate your point. You say, I'm coming totally undressed. No, obviously not, because you understand it's not covered. Say, so this is not covered tzibah, and therefore, even if it's a child, it's the same halacha. He cannot read from the Torah at Pecheach. It's a single understanding. You come to get an aliyah, you're being koyed by Torah. You come in the state of respectable dress, because it's not covered the tzibah that a person comes like that to the Torah. It said in the Mishnah that Suma, a blind person, he could say Bechas Kriyishma, etc. But Rabbi Huda said no. Huda says he never saw Ma'iris in his life. He's saying Zukta Yitza Ma'iris, Vizu Kens Zog and Yitza Ma'iris, and therefore he can't daven with the Amid to say Bechas Kriyishma. Now, Tanya Linda Brisa that they elaborate on this machlekes. Amalei Rabbi Huda said to Rabbi Huda, what's the problem that he never saw the Ma'iris in his life? Harbat Salfa Lidrash b'Merkava. There were many that went to look and expound in the heavenly chariot that's brought in Seder Yechezkel, the greatest secrets of Kabbalah. And they never saw the chariot, they didn't have the divine image, and still they expounded it. So you see, you could talk about something even though you didn't really actually behold it. But Rabbi Huda, he would tell you, no, Hasan ba'avanta de libertayim. So that's really dependent on the understanding of the heart. And the person could focus and he could understand what it is, so you could discuss it and give a drasha and ma'asim merkava. No, here the whole point of the bracha b'yitzim oiris is because of the pleasure we're thanking Hashem for the benefit we have from it. For Leslie Hana, this blind person, ultimate lamaisa, doesn't have benefit because he's blind, and therefore there's no way we could have him go and expound on the blessing of yitzim oiris. But for Rabbanan, they would say no, it's not true. No, he could daven for the Amit and say Birchas Krishma because a blind person does benefit from the luminaries. How so? Says the Gemara, interesting, Rabbi Yesi, a well-known idea. The Tanya Linda Brisa and Rabbi Yesi says, Kol Yomai, all my days Yisi mitzvah al mikras. They said I was pained. It's like you see how when they were learning a pasuk, if he couldn't understand, he was pained all his life on this pasuk, which says in Devarim, it says the Yisem and Mashish b'tzarayim, that you're going to be groping around in the noonday, like a blind person gropes around in the dark. It's talking about by the curses, the teichacha, people if we don't keep the Torah. But what bothered him was, why are you saying Iver ba'afela? Why are you saying a blind person in the dark? Why would a blind person care about the dark or the light? What do you mean? It doesn't make a difference for him because he can't see anyway. He says, until there was a story that happened with me. One once I was walking in the pitch black of the darkness of the nighttime, but and I saw a blind person walking on the road. He had a torch in his hand. I said to him, my son, what are you doing with a torch? You can't see anywhere. What are you lighting up the way? He said to me, as long as the torch is in my hand, I see people see me, and they save me from the pits, from the thorns, and from the prickly bushes. And therefore, I have the torch so that other people could see and they could help me. So that's what it means, even ba'afela, to say no, like a blind person groping around the dark that he can't see and the others can't see to help him either. He finally understood what was pshat in that pasuk. And that's also why a blind person could make the bracha of Yitzma Iris. You don't have enough of the Iris. No, he does have enough Iris, because since there's light outside and others can see and they can say, oh, is the Alta Yidul do that blind? He can take him and help him. So he does have benefit from the Iris. And therefore the Rabban said he could make the Birchas Kriyishma for the Tzibur of Yitzma Iris. Now we continue with the halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing on the related theme that we talked about in the previous Mishnah, Nesiyas Kapayim. So we talk about Nesiyas Kapayim over here. Mishnah tells us Kohen sheyesh b'yadav mumin. If a Kohen has in his hands blemishes, lo yisas kapah, so he shouldn't do Nesiyas Kapayim. The reason for that is because everyone's going to look at his hands. What's on his hands? Look at over there. And the Gemara says the Chagiga Daf Tezayin Aleph that if someone looks on the Kahanim when they're doing Nesiyas Kapayim, his eye gets dimmed because the divine presence is resting on the hands, and therefore we don't want people to look. And therefore, if he has blemishes, he can't do Nesiyas Kapayim because people are going to look. He says, also, let's say his hands are dyed with woad, which is some type of a blue type of a dye. But he says, he shouldn't do Nesiyas Kapayim because he's the blue man group and he sticks up his hand and his bloya hands over here. What's going on over here? So, everyone's going to be looking at his hands, and we don't want people to be looking over there. Again, that's where our minhag of putting the talis and elsewhere we see it's not really the divine presence by us, but in the Mishnaic law, that was the concern. Therefore, if someone had something interesting on his hands, that would disqualify him from doing the Nesiyas Kapayim. Now, actually, Tana within the Brayso the Gemara brings, the moment Sha'amr, this that we said the blemishes are a problem, is the fun of Yoda Vidrag, is his face, his hands, or his feet. Now, face is obvious because if he's the blue man group and he's got the face, everyone's looking over there. And his hands, obviously. Now, even his feet, because we know when someone does Nesiyas Kapayim, they take off their shoes, as the Brayso teacher said that Mem Amen Aleph. So if he has a blemish over there, people are going to be looking like, what's up with that foot over there? And because they're looking at his feet, they're going to look at his hands, and then we're going to run back into the same problem. So if it's on hands, face, or feet, we don't let him do Nesiyas Kapayim. Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, it says Yodav by Hakonius. If you have spotted hands, you have flecking on the hands, Yisas Kapov, again, shouldn't do Nesiyas Kapayim. Tanamach is in the Brayso Yodav by Hakonius. If someone has spots on his hands, Yisas Kapov should not do Nesiyas Kapayim. If he has hands that are kumais, which are bent over, or akushas, or bent to the side, Yisas Kapov, he also should not do Nesiyas Kapayim. He's like, what's up with those hands? And they're looking at this, is sticking out his hands like this, and again, they're going to be looking at the hands. Amar Avasi says the related halacha, Chayfani, which are the Kahanim that are from Haifa, Uveshani, or Kahanim that are from Beit Shan, Yisas Kapov, they also should not do Nesiyas Kapayim because they don't clearly articulate their words. They're not able to enunciate the words so properly, and therefore they don't qualify to say Brechas Kana. And Tanamach is similar in the Brayso that Imarim Lefnei HaTeva, we don't have to daven for the Amid. Lo Anshe Beit Shan, not the people from Beit Shan. Lo Anshe Beit Chayfa, not the people from Beit Chayfa. Lo Anshe Tevoinin, not the people from Tevoinin. And the reason they shekoiden la'alf and einen, they pronounce aleph as if they're pronouncing an ayin. Now we're not so proficient, but the problem is if you're saying Birchas Kohanim and you say Yo'ed Hashem Panav Elecha, and you say instead of mit aleph you say with an ayin, that's like a curse. Yor Hashem Panav, Hashem will light up his face, but if you say with an ayin, the word Yo'er actually means to curse. And Panav could mean a terminology of anger, like we find Pani Alechi, as Panai means as Yasrugzi. So if you say it the wrong way, instead of saying lighting up, you're actually saying a terminology of cursing, and because Hashem's getting angry, that's what his face means to say. And also the ayin and alpha, you might make an ayin into aleph, again, and which will ruin the tefillah. So therefore, they didn't have them daven the amid. The Gemara says in Brachas Alam Beis that in Beir of Elazar they would call Alpha, they would say for Aleph as Ayin, Ayin as Aleph. That's as Rashi, it's only by a drasha. But to actually daven like that, that's problematic, and therefore they wouldn't have daven Amid. And actually the Gemara brings the story, Amalei Reb Chia Reb Shimon ben Rebbe. Reb Chia said to Reb Shimon, the son of Rebbe, El Maliat Levi, if you would be a Levi, Paslatim in a Duchen, you would actually be invalidated from Duchening. Mishum da Avi Kalach, because you have a thick voice. And the Gemara teaches on Chulin of Chavdam and Aleph that in Shilei and the Beis HaMikdash, the Levim would be invalidated with their voice. So he was telling him it's a good thing you're not a Levi, because if you were a Levi, you wouldn't be able to go ahead and duchen. Because you have a dicker, you have a very deep voice, very thick voice. So Asa Amalei Lavu, he comes to him and tells his Tati. He says, you know what he told me? He told me that I wouldn't be able to duchen. So Amalei's father says back to him, and again, you have to understand the context of these great people. He says, Zil Amalei, go tell him, Kshat Magia, so when you come to the pasuk in Yeshaya, which says V'chechisi la Hashem, that I'm waiting for Hashem, Le'nimtzis machar megadif, aren't you a blasphemer against God and disgracing? Because he would say a ches as a hey. So it's Chas Hashem comes out like V'chechisi la Hashem, that I hit Hashem. So he says, hey, calm down, don't tell my son about that his deep voice, that he wouldn't be able to duchen. You read a pasuk, you're like a machar of megadif. Which actually Taisa finds it interesting, because if he couldn't say a ches, as we know many non-Jews have a difficulty with the ches, they can't say it. So how did Rebbe actually have him daven for the Amid? I think Gemara says about Metzia, but I thought we don't have Anshe Chayfa, Anshe Beisham daven because they say Aleph Ayin Aleph. So on that says Taisa that actually if he tried very hard, and you have this by people who have speech impediments, that if he would focus to say a ches, he could with great difficulty, but it wasn't so easy. So therefore he was telling him, when you say v'chechisi, if you don't usually, you say v'chechisi, you're going to be mecharv megadif. But, so why did he ask him David Ahmed? That's because Eliyahu told him that the Geul is going to happen through him, therefore he has, but he was able to, if he really put in a lot of energy, to say a ches and not just a hey. The Gemara continues on these halachas. Rav Huni says, Zalvagon, which is someone that his eyes are constantly tearing, he also lays his cup if he shouldn't do Nesi's Kapayim. And again, because everyone's going to be looking at him, what's up with him, what's up with his face? And again, once they're looking at him, and he's facing everyone, he's on stage, turning around towards everyone, so everyone's going to look at his hands. Now the Gemara says, but there was such a person that was B'Shebevusa de Ravuna. It was the name of Ravuna. But although his eyes are always tear, he actually did Nesi's Kapayim. Says the Gemara, who dash be'idai hava? That person, everyone was already accustomed to him already. No one looked at him anymore. The word dash is like they're already used to. Like we find keeping the dash. Once you're already threshed, they thresh. So it's not such a novelty anymore. So therefore, people are not looking at him. Tanam of similar in the Brisa, Zalvagun Laisas Kappa. Someone who is always tearing shouldn't do Nesi's Kapayim. But if he's already accustomed, he's already a person in the city, it's mutter. And we tell people with social anxiety, similar things. You know what I'm saying? It's like, don't worry, people get used to these things and they're not looking at you anymore. They don't really care. And similarly, Rabbi Shloimy says, someone who's blind to one of his eyes shouldn't do Nesi's Kapayim. They're looking, they see, is that the glass eye? Is that, the... So, that says, there was someone in Rabbi Yehuda's neighborhood who would do Nesi's Kapayim. So, again, who does be there? But that's, people already used to him already. No one's looking, it's not such a novelty, and therefore it's not a problem. In the price, some blind, one of his eyes shouldn't do Nesi's Kapayim. But again, but if it was already well known in the city and it's not such a novelty, mutter, it's going to be permitted. Now in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, he says, Misha Yadav Tzvuis. If someone had dyed hands, his hands are blue, let's say, but again, the same idea says Tanu in the Brisa, but most of the people in the city, that's the work that they do, and it's in somewhere in Iowa, and everyone has these blue hands. So mutter is permitted because again, no one's really so interested, and it's not such a novelty that you have these colorful hands because everyone's got it like that, and then it's not so special. And Taisa even says the same thing would be, but Mumin should be other would be the same idea because it's just no one cares. It doesn't make such an impression, so no one's going to look at your hands. See that I love the next Mishnah again, continuing also a related vein regarding when we're talking about even living at table who davens for the Amid. So related, these Mishnayos are like related type Mishnayos. So the Mishnah says, if someone says, says I'm not going to daven for the Amid b'tzvuin. I don't want to daven with colored clothing. I don't want to wear a blue shirt. So so even with the white shirt, we don't let him daven. We don't go change into the white shirt. It doesn't mean because he wants to be yeshivish. The Gemara will explain the reason why he won't be allowed to daven at all, even with a vasahem. Let's say he says besandal einyav. He says I don't want to daven with amid with my shoes, with my sandals. So Av Yachav Liya, but then even without shoes, let's say with socks, he's not allowed to go down with Amid. Related halacha regarding, because this, as we'll see in the Gemara, we're concerned it's like heretical, of heresy, of like a courses. So related halachas, if someone makes his tefillin sheberosh, a gula round like an egg and like a nut, so that's sakana, that's dangerous. Rashi says because it could go into your head if you bang into something. So if it's round, we have square, so it's not so pointy. If it's round, the danger could go into the head. This says differently. This is not dangerous. He says, but what it means is dangerous is because generally, if you perform the mitzvah of tefillin, it actually protects you in situations of danger. Here, where it's not the mitzvah of tefillin, so it's dangerous in a dangerous situation because it's not going to protect you. And like the Mishnah says, because there's no mitzvah because it has to be squared, it can't be round. Let's say you put the tefillin shel reish al metzchay on the forehead, which is not where we put it, not on the forehead. And actually, one has to be careful, like you see these pictures a lot, to make sure that the tefillin are above the hairline, not on the forehead. Let's say someone puts the tefillin shel yad al pas yod on the palm of his hand. So that's the way of heresy, of courses, because those people disgrace the rabbinic Jewish. And they go after what it means. Literally, it says in the Torah, should be between your eyes. So the guy puts this big tefillin right between his eyes, like on his forehead. And al yadcha means on your hand, so he puts on the palm of his hand. But our Rabbanim, they darshan menachas of Hamazam based on the Gzeir Shava. The bein necha means on the fontanelle, which is where the soft spot of a baby is. And al yadcha is on the top of the arm, which when it says alav avecha, it's opposite the ear of one's heart. Let's say tzipin zav. Let's say he plates his tefillin with gold. Rebbe tefillin with gold covering, or v'nosna beisim kuli shaloi, or he puts it on the outside of his jacket. What's this? I'm bearing my shirt. He leaves his shirts on and he puts it on the outside of his clothing. So hariz derech hachitzanim. Those two are the ways of the ones on the outside, meaning people that go after their own understanding. They don't go based on the understanding of Chazal. And the problem is Chazal say, means for you a sign and not for others a sign. So it's got to be under your shirt, not over your shirt. And additionally, if you plate it with gold, it's also a problem because although you think, yeah, beautiful, making tefillin even better, no, Chazal tells us, which means say that it has to be something that could go into your mouth from a kosher animal and not gold. And therefore, if you do this, you just, like we say, svarim chitzayim. So you think it's such a nice thing, but the words of the Torah are not like this. So the Gemara says, Maitem, what's the reason of the opening halachas that we said that if he says, I'm not going to daven if I'm wearing my shoes, I'm not davening if I'm wearing colored clothing? Maitem, what's the reason that we said that even if he's not going to do it that way, that he can't daven the Amid? Because we're concerned that maybe a spirit of heresy is like what was thrown in him, which is those who worship idolatry and those who are heretics are particular about certain things. It has to be like this, it has to be like that. And if he's saying, I don't want like this, we say, no, you can't daven them at all because you have all this shtistim, and who knows that maybe it's coming from apikourses. So too, the Mishnah said, so if someone makes his tefillin round, so it's dangerous and there's no mitzvah. Says the Gemara, let's say this supports what we're learning in the following brisa. Brisa says, tefillin merubayis, that tefillin have to be squared. Allah chamesh mesina. And V'amarav, he explained, what does it mean tefillin have to be squared? B'tifran, with the stitching, which Rashi explains that means to say that you stitch the base of the tefillin, you have to be careful not to ruin the square by pulling the threads too tight. Taisa says another pshat from Rabbi Tam that it actually means that the stitching has to be squared. So you have to go all the way around with the stitching. But the stitching, and of Simon, even the diagonal, which is that you have to make sure halachically you have the appropriate diagonal of a square, which is that if you're doing a finger breadth in the width and the length, so then the diagonal, the hypotenuse has to be 1 2/5, that's how an appropriate diagonal is, and then you know you have a square. But so our Mishnah seems to be saying that it can't be round, it's got to be square. So it says it's not a right to the halacha because I'm not puppy says nasnit vidikam gusa. Our Mishnah might be talking about where you made it round like a nut, but maybe round like a lentil would be okay. So it doesn't support the brisa from our Mishnah that it's got to be square. It just can't be that shape. But maybe if it was a different shape, like a lentil, even though it wasn't squared, would be okay. It just can't be a gula like an egg or like an egg, and therefore it wouldn't be a raya that you have to have specifically this halacha of ribua. That wouldn't be a raya from the halacha of Mishnah. I think to any time.